It was supposed to be funny. Just a quick jab during dinner with friends, the kind of line people laugh at and forget about. But instead, those words became the last thing I ever said that truly mattered to my husband. Ryan and I had been married for 6 years. He wasn't loud or dominant like some men. He wasn't the kind who argued with strangers or puffed his chest to prove a point. He was soft-spoken, thoughtful, and incredibly patient. The kind of man who'd listen before he spoke. The kind of man who always kept his promises. And for a long time, that calmness was what I loved most about him. But somewhere along the way, that gentleness stopped feeling like strength. It started to feel like passivity. Maybe it was because I'd grown restless, or because I'd been spending too much time comparing him to other men who were more assertive, louder, more in charge. Whatever it was, I started to see Ryan's kindness as weakness. It all came to a head one Saturday night. We were out to dinner with 2 other couples, old college friends of mine. The conversation was easy, the drinks kept coming, and everyone was laughing about marriage stories and little fights. Someone brought up the topic of protective husbands, and one of the women joked about how her husband once confronted a guy who had hit on her at a bar. Everyone laughed, and then someone looked at me. "What about you, Emily?" one of them asked. "Would Ryan fight for you?" Ryan chuckled softly, looking down at his drink. But before he could answer, I said, "Ryan? Please." He'd probably apologize to the guy and walk away. The table erupted in laughter. I laughed too, but Ryan didn't. He didn't argue or roll his eyes. He just smiled politely and said nothing. He looked at me for half a second, a quiet, wounded look that said everything words never could. Then he went back to his meal like nothing happened. The rest of the evening passed like normal. But something had shifted. I felt it in the car ride home. The silence, the absence of his usual light conversation. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look disappointed. Just empty. When we got home, I tried to lighten the mood. "Come on, Ryan," I said softly. "It was just a joke." He didn't respond at first. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Yeah, I know." And that was it. The next morning, he made coffee like always. He kissed my forehead before leaving for work. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. Over the next few days, I noticed small changes. He stopped waiting up for me when I worked late. He stopped teasing me about my bad cooking. He stopped reaching for my hand when we watched movies. It wasn't anger. It was detachment. I thought he'd get over it. I thought the silence was just him needing space. But then one night, I came home to find his wedding ring on the kitchen counter and his clothes missing from the closet. No note. No fight. No goodbye. Just silence. The very thing I once mistook for weakness. I stood there in disbelief, trying to process what had happened. I called him over and over, but he didn't answer. The house that had always felt warm now felt painfully still. Every little thing, his half-drunk mug of coffee, his jacket on the hook, mocked me with the reminder that I had pushed away the one person who loved me unconditionally. Days turned into weeks. I told myself he just needed time, that he'd come back once he cooled off. But deep down, I knew better. Ryan was never impulsive. If he left, it was because he had finally decided he deserved better. It wasn't until a month later that I saw him again. I was at a grocery store, standing in line, when I heard his voice. My heart nearly stopped. He was a few aisles over, talking to someone, a woman. She laughed softly at something he said, and the sound of it stung. He looked different, calmer, lighter, like someone who had finally let go of the weight he'd been carrying. When he saw me, he froze for a second. Then he smiled, polite, distant, like you'd smile at a stranger. "Hey, Emily," he said quietly. "Hey," I replied, my voice barely audible. How are you?" He nodded. "Good. You?" "Fine." I lied. The silence between us was unbearable. I wanted to say so much, to apologize, to tell him I hadn't meant it, that I was stupid and careless. But I couldn't find the words. He didn't owe me anything, not even an explanation. When he turned to leave, I blurted out, "You were never weak, Ryan." He stopped, looking back at me one last time. His voice was calm, almost kind. "I know," he said. And then he walked away. That moment broke something inside me, because it was then that I finally understood what strength really meant. Strength isn't yelling the loudest in a room or throwing a punch to prove a point. It's walking away when you've been disrespected. It's choosing silence over shouting. It's knowing your worth and refusing to stay where you're diminished. Ryan didn't walk out because he was weak. He walked out because he was strong enough to stop trying to prove himself to someone who couldn't see his value. In the months that followed, I replayed that night in my head again and again. The laughter, the look on his face, the silence in the car. I realized that my joke wasn't just a moment of bad humor. It was a reflection of how I had stopped appreciating him, how I had let the world's idea of masculinity define how I saw love. Now, when I think of Ryan, I don't think of the man I mocked. I think of the man who loved quietly, who protected me not by fighting others, but by keeping me safe from my own chaos. He protected me when he helped me through panic attacks, when he never shouted during arguments, when he always made sure I felt heard even when I was wrong. He didn't need to raise his voice to make me feel safe. His presence alone did that. But I was too blind to see it. It's ironic, isn't it? I told him he couldn't protect me, and he proved me right. Not because he was weak, but because I was no longer someone worth protecting. Now, when people ask me why my marriage ended, I tell them the truth. Not the sugar-coated version about growing apart, but the real one, that I took kindness for weakness, and by the time I realized the difference, it was too late. I used to think love was about grand gestures and loud declarations. Now I know it's about quiet loyalty, consistency, and respect. The kind of love that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Ryan taught me that by leaving. And though I lost him, his silence taught me more about strength than any argument ever could.